Blood dripped from Jamal Washington's severed dreadlocks onto the pristine airline carpet as passengers gasped in horror. The flight attendant stood frozen, scissors in hand, not realizing the teenager's father was the airline's largest investor. One phone call would change everything forever. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe now to follow this incredible journey of injustice and redemption. Can you believe what happened to this young man? Let's find out how a single moment of discrimination sparked a revolution in an entire industry. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the Washington family home in their affluent Atlanta suburb. 17-year-old Jamal Washington meticulously packed his saxophone into its case, his fingers moving with the precision that had earned him a coveted spot at the National Youth Music Program in New York City. This scholarship wasn't just an opportunity, it was validation of 5 years of relentless practice, of early mornings and late nights dedicated to perfecting his craft. "You got everything packed, son?" Dr. Andre Washington asked, leaning against the doorframe of Jamal's bedroom. At 47, Dr. Washington carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had overcome countless obstacles to become one of Atlanta's most respected neurosurgeons. "Almost done, Dad," Jamal replied, carefully placing sheet music into his backpack. His dreadlocks, which he'd grown and maintained for the past 5 years, were neatly tied back. Each lock told a story, of heritage, identity, and personal growth. They weren't just hair, they were a connection to his roots, a silent rebellion against conformity, a declaration of self in a world that often tried to erase him. What Jamal didn't know was that his father had splurged on first-class tickets for their flight to New York. Dr. Washington was typically frugal despite his success, preferring to live below his means and invest wisely. This trip, however, called for celebration. "This program's gonna change your life," Dr. Washington said, his voice softening with pride. "Not many kids get this chance." Jamal nodded, well aware of the opportunity before him. The program accepted only 20 students nationwide each year. Being the only one selected from Georgia carried both honor and pressure. "I know, Dad. I won't waste it." Dr. Washington's phone buzzed. Another congratulatory message from a colleague. What none of his medical peers knew was that Andre Washington wasn't just a brilliant surgeon, he was also a major investor in several corporations, including Skyline Airlines, where he quietly held 23% of the company's shares through his investment firm. He preferred keeping his business ventures separate from his medical practice, believing his work should speak for itself without the influence of his financial success. As Jamal carefully placed his dreadlocks in a protective sleep cap for the journey, his father's mind drifted back to his own days in medical school. The memory of Professor Wilkins suggesting he reconsider his career path after acing the neuroanatomy exam still stung 2 decades later. "People might not feel comfortable with someone like you operating on their brains," the professor had said. Andre had responded by graduating top of his class and eventually becoming the youngest department head in the hospital's history. "Excellence is the best response to ignorance," he'd always told Jamal. "Let your achievements speak so loudly they can't hear what you look like." Jamal had inherited his father's quiet determination, channeling it into his music rather than confrontation. When Mrs. Hannity from 3 Doors Down had expressed surprise that urban music could sound so sophisticated, after hearing him practice, Jamal had simply invited her to his school recital where he performed a piece he'd composed himself. She'd left in tears, later bringing him homemade cookies with a note of apology. "I got something for you," Dr. Washington said, pulling a small wooden box from his pocket. Inside was a handcrafted reed holder carved from African blackwood, with intricate patterns etched into its surface. "It belonged to your grandfather. Thought you might want to carry a piece of family history with you." Jamal carefully took the box, running his fingers over the patterns. "It's perfect, Dad. Thank you." 2 hours later, they arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, allowing plenty of time before their flight. As they approached the security checkpoint, Jamal was pulled aside for a random screening while several white passengers walked through unhindered. "Sir, "We need to check your hair," the TSA agent said flatly. Dr. Washington stepped forward. "Is there a problem?" "Standard procedure," the agent replied without making eye contact. "Dense hair can conceal prohibited items." Jamal caught his father's eye, giving a slight shake of his head. They'd been through this before. The unspoken agreement between them: pick your battles. After an extensive pat-down and having his saxophone case swabbed twice for explosive residue, Jamal was finally cleared. As they gathered their belongings, Dr. Washington checked his watch. "We've still got an hour before boarding. Want to grab something to eat?" Neither of them knew that this ordinary beginning would spiral into something that would change not just their lives, but an entire industry. The dream trip was about to become a nightmare, and then something else entirely, a reckoning. The boarding process for Skyline Airlines Flight 2143 to New York began promptly at 11:30 a.m. First-class passengers were called first, and Dr. Washington nudged Jamal forward with their boarding passes in hand. As they approached the gate, the attendant's smile faltered slightly when she saw Jamal's dreadlocks. She examined their boarding passes with unusual scrutiny before reluctantly waving them through. "Have a nice flight," she said, her enthusiasm noticeably dimmer than it had been for the older white couple just ahead of them. As they walked down the jet bridge, Dr. Washington received an urgent call from the hospital. A patient from a complex surgery the previous day was showing concerning symptoms. "I need to take this," he told Jamal. "Go ahead and get settled. I'll be right there." Jamal nodded and continued onto the plane alone. He was greeted by Bethany Harmon, a flight attendant with 15 years of experience at Skyline. At 42, Bethany had worked her way up from regional flights to the more prestigious international routes before returning to domestic first class by choice. Her perfectly pressed uniform and rigid posture reflected her approach to her job: orderly, traditional, and by the book. What wasn't visible was her personnel file, which contained 3 formal complaints for customer service issues with minority passengers. Each had been quietly dismissed by management as misunderstandings. Bethany considered herself fair. She simply believed in proper conduct and appearance, values she felt were increasingly abandoned in modern society. "Boarding pass?" she asked Jamal sharply, though she had already watched him scan it at the gate. Jamal produced it again, maintaining his composure. "Seat 3A, he said politely. Bethany examined the pass with narrowed eyes. "First class is for first-class ticket holders only," she said, her tone suggesting doubt. "Yes, ma'am. That's my ticket." With clear reluctance, she stepped aside. "Very well." As Jamal found his seat by the window, he noticed how other passengers glanced at him, some with curiosity, others with what looked like disapproval. He stored his backpack under the seat, keeping his precious saxophone in the overhead bin. A white businessman in his 50s took the aisle seat beside him, giving a curt nod before immediately opening his laptop. The cabin continued to fill, and Jamal texted his father, "3A. All set up." Bethany reappeared at their row. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" she asked Jamal, ignoring his seatmate completely. Puzzled, Jamal showed it to her a third time. "Is something wrong?" "Just confirming," she said curtly. "We've had issues with seat assignments recently." The businessman beside Jamal frowned slightly but said nothing, his eyes fixed on his screen. Minutes later, Bethany returned with refreshment offers for first-class passengers. She served everyone around Jamal before finally turning to him. "Water?" she asked, her tone notably cooler than the warm, "What would you like to drink?" she'd offered others. "Orange juice, please," Jamal replied. She returned with a plastic cup of orange juice, placing it on his tray without a napkin. "Your hair," she said abruptly, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "It's hanging over the seat. That's not appropriate for first class." Jamal touched his dreadlocks self-consciously. They were neatly tied back and not hanging anywhere near the seat. "I'm sorry, but I don't think they're." "It's unprofessional," Bethany interrupted. and potentially unsanitary for other passengers. Several heads turned. Two other flight attendants, Carlos Mendez and Lisa Turner, exchanged uncomfortable glances but remained silent by the galley. "My hair is clean and maintained," Jamal explained calmly, drawing on years of practice handling microaggressions. "These dreadlocks are an expression of my cultural heritage." A young woman across the aisle had begun recording discreetly with her phone. Others were watching the interaction with increasing interest. Bethany's face hardened. Skyline Airlines has a policy about hair extending into the shared space of other passengers. "My hair isn't extending anywhere," Jamal pointed out, still maintaining his composure though his heart was racing. "It's tied back and completely within my personal space." By now, more passengers had their phones out. Bethany noticed and straightened her posture further. "I'll need to speak with the captain about this," she said, turning sharply toward the cockpit. The businessman beside Jamal finally spoke up. "I don't see any problem with his hair," he said, but Bethany was already gone. In the cockpit, Captain Bradley Mason, a 25-year veteran with Skyline, listened to Bethany's complaint with thinning patience. At 58, he had seen countless trivial cabin disputes and had developed a standard approach: let the flight attendants handle it unless it affected flight safety. "What exactly is the issue, Bethany?" he asked, checking his pre-flight checklist. "A passenger in first class has inappropriate hair that violates company policy," she explained. "It's causing disruption." Captain Mason sighed. "Is it blocking any emergency exits?" "No, but..." "Is it preventing you from performing your duties?" "No, but there's a policy." "Handle it," he cut her off. "We're already running 10 minutes behind. Just don't delay takeoff." Emboldened by what she interpreted as authorization, Bethany returned to Jamal's seat where a small crowd of onlookers had gathered. More phones were recording now. "The captain has confirmed that your hair violates Skyline policy," she announced, an outright lie that would later be exposed in the investigation. "You have two options: secure it completely out of sight, or we'll need to remove you from the flight." Jamal looked around desperately for his father, who was still on the phone with the hospital in the jet bridge. "My dad's a passenger too. He'll be here any second. Can I just talk to him first?" "We're behind schedule," Bethany insisted. "I need your decision now, or I'll call security." The businessman beside Jamal stood up. "This is ridiculous. His hair isn't bothering anyone." "Sir, please stay out of this," Bethany snapped. A flight attendant from economy, Tara Williams, approached cautiously. "Bethany, maybe we should wait for his father." "We have a schedule to keep," Bethany cut her off. She produced a pair of scissors from her uniform pocket. "I can help you trim it to comply with policy." Jamal's eyes widened in horror. "You want to cut my hair?" "No way." "Then you'll have to leave the flight," Bethany said coldly, gesturing toward the exit. The security guard at the door took a step forward, hand on his radio. Trapped and increasingly panicked, Jamal tried calling his father, but the call went straight to voicemail. Dr. Washington was still speaking with his patient's nurse. "Final warning," Bethany said. "Comply or deplane." Cornered and seeing no alternative that wouldn't cause an even bigger scene, Jamal reluctantly said, "Fine, just trim it a little bit if that's really necessary." But just the ends. What happened next would shock the nation. Instead of carefully trimming the ends as implied, Bethany took hold of one of Jamal's dreadlocks and cut through it completely at the root. The severed dreadlock fell to the carpet as gasps erupted throughout the cabin. Blood from Jamal's scalp where the scissors had nicked him dripped onto the carpet. Time seemed to freeze as everyone stared in disbelief. Jamal touched his head in shock, his fingers coming away with traces of blood. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice breaking. Bethany stood motionless, scissors still in hand, suddenly realizing she had crossed a line from which there was no return. And she had no idea that the teenager's father, currently rushing down the jet bridge after finishing his call, was Dr. Andre Washington, the man whose investment firm controlled nearly a quarter of Skyline Airlines stock. The incident that would ground an airline had begun. The first tweet appeared before Flight 2143 even pushed back from the gate. Posted by Zoe Chen, a 23-year-old marketing assistant seated in row 5. Watching in horror as a Skyline Air flight attendant just cut off a black teen's dreadlock. Blood everywhere. Video coming. #Skyline cuts. Within minutes, her shaky footage of Bethany cutting Jamal's dreadlock was uploaded and spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. The 14-second clip captured the shocked expressions of nearby passengers, Jamal's look of devastated disbelief, and the severed dreadlock lying on the airplane carpet. Dr. Washington had returned to find his son trembling, a tissue pressed to his bleeding scalp. "What happened?" he demanded, looking from Jamal to Bethany, who had finally lowered the scissors. Before anyone could explain, Captain Mason's voice came over the intercom, "Flight attendants, prepare for departure. This flight isn't going anywhere, Dr." Washington stated firmly, loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "My son has been assaulted by your staff. Sir, please take your seat or I'll be forced to have you removed," Bethany said, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Dr. Washington asked quietly. The question hung in the air, but the airline protocol machine was already in motion. The cabin door had been closed, and Captain Mason was determined to maintain schedule. Security had been called off after Jamal's compliance, and the incident was being treated as resolved from the flight crew's perspective. "Dad, let's just go," Jamal pleaded, humiliated and wanting to escape the stares of other passengers. "I don't want to be on this flight anymore." Dr. Washington looked at his son's face and made a decision. "We'll handle this another way," he said, taking out his phone as they reluctantly took their seats for takeoff. By the time Flight 2143 reached cruising altitude, #SkylineCuts was trending nationally. The video had been viewed over 100,000 times and was being picked up by major news outlets. Skyline's social media team, unprepared for the crisis, issued a boilerplate response that only fueled the outrage. "Skyline Airlines is aware of a situation regarding our appearance policy enforcement. We are investigating the matter and remain committed to a comfortable flying experience for all passengers." This tone-deaf statement sparked a new wave of fury across social media. Comments flooded in. "Appearance policy enforcement equals cutting a black kid's hair OFF. #boycott Skyline. This isn't policy enforcement, this is assault and a hate crime. #SkylineCuts. As the plane continued toward New York, the atmosphere in the cabin was unbearably tense. Jamal had retreated to the bathroom where he texted friends about what happened, spreading the story further. Other passengers were divided, some expressing outrage to the flight attendants, others uncomfortably looking away, a few even muttering that rules are rules. Carlos Mendez, one of the other first-class flight attendants, quietly provided Jamal with a proper first aid kit when he returned to his seat. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "This should never have happened." Bethany had been instructed by the captain to remain in the galley for the remainder of the flight, where she was frantically texting her union representative. 30,000 feet below, Skyline's corporate headquarters was descending into chaos. Thomas Reynolds, the 52-year-old CEO, was pulled from a budget meeting to address the escalating crisis. "How bad is it?" he asked Sarah Jenkins, the head of public relations. "It's everywhere, sir," she replied, showing him the view counts climbing by the thousands each minute. "And it gets worse. The boy's father is apparently someone important, though we don't have details yet." Reynolds, known for his bottom-line focus and impatience with what he called social media tantrums, waved dismissively. "Issue a statement about our commitment to diversity. Offer them vouchers for future flights. This will blow over by next week." Sarah hesitated. "Sir, there's blood in the video. His hair was physically cut off. This feels different." "It's hair," Reynolds replied coldly. "It grows back." Our policy on passenger appearance is clear. The policy says nothing about cutting passengers' hair, Sarah pointed out. And there are serious cultural implications with dreadlocks specifically. Reynolds checked his watch. Handle it however you need to, just contain it. I have a shareholders meeting to prepare for. He had no idea that one of those shareholders was currently on the flight in question, documenting everything. Back on the plane, celebrity reactions were pouring in as the video spread further. Basketball superstar Dwayne Johnson tweeted, "This is disgusting. At Skyline Air, you better make this right or never fly again. Solidarity with this young king. #Skyline Cuts." Grammy-winning artist Alicia Keys shared, "Cutting a black child's dreadlocks is cutting away their identity, their culture, their soul. This is violence. #Skyline Cuts." As Flight 2143 began its descent into LaGuardia Airport, the flight attendants made an unusual announcement. Upon arrival, passengers in rows 1 to 5 are asked to remain seated until specially designated passengers have deplaned. Dr. Washington leaned over to Jamal. "They're trying to get us off quietly, away from the other passengers." Not happening. When the plane finally reached the gate, Jamal and his father were shocked to see the flashing lights of cameras through the airplane windows. Somehow, news crews had learned which flight they were on. Captain Mason's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Folks, there appears to be a media presence at our gate. Please remain calm and exit in an orderly fashion. Skyline representatives will be available in the terminal to assist with any concerns." When the door finally opened, Dr. Washington and Jamal found themselves facing a wall of cameras and microphones. In that instant, Jamal Washington became more than just a talented saxophone player headed to a prestigious music program. He became a symbol in the ongoing battle against discrimination. As reporters shouted questions, Dr. Washington placed a protective arm around his son's shoulders. "My son was assaulted today because of his hair, because of his identity," he stated firmly, his deep voice carrying across the terminal. "Skyline Airlines will be held accountable." Watching this unfold on airport televisions, Thomas Reynolds hastily called an emergency press conference where he made what would later be described as the gasoline statement for how it inflamed the situation. Skyline Airlines regrets the discomfort experienced by passengers today. "Our policies are designed to ensure comfort and safety for everyone. While the enforcement method in question was not standard procedure, we stand by our crew's authority to maintain appropriate appearance standards in our premium cabins." As these words were broadcast, someone in the crowd at LaGuardia shouted to Dr. Washington, "Are you going to sue them?" Dr. Washington's response was measured but clear: Skyline has much bigger problems than a lawsuit coming their way. No one yet understood just how prophetic those words would prove to be. "What do you mean you didn't know?" Dr. Vanessa Lewis demanded, her voice echoing through the surgical suite. "Andre, I called you 3 times. Dar." Andre Washington stared at the post-operation scans of their shared patient, Martin Rodriguez, a 43-year-old father of 4 who had undergone a delicate spinal procedure that morning. The surgery had been successful, but complications had developed hours later, requiring immediate intervention that Dr. Washington had provided while completely unaware of what was happening to his son. "My phone was on silent during the call with the nurse," he explained, his voice unnaturally calm. "I thought Martin was stabilized." "He is now," Dr. Lewis replied, studying her colleague's face. "Andre, what's going on? You're never out of reach for patients." Dr. Washington's phone buzzed again, the 37th notification in the past 15 minutes. He glanced at it briefly, then froze, his professional composure cracking for the first time in his career. "I need to go," he said abruptly, tearing off his lab coat. "Martin's stable. Call me if anything changes, but only if it's life or death. Andre." Dr. Lewis called after him, but he was already gone, running through the hospital corridors toward the parking garage. Inside his Tesla, Dr. Washington finally had a moment to process the barrage of messages flooding his phone. The first was a text from Jamal sent minutes after the incident. "Dad, she cut my hair. She actually cut it off." Then came the missed calls, the news alerts, the videos. Sitting in the hospital parking garage, Dr. Andre Washington, who had built his life around careful control and measured responses, watched in growing horror as a Skyline Airlines flight attendant assaulted his son. The video ended. Dr. Washington sat motionless, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. A memory surfaced, Jamal at 12 years old, asking permission to grow dreadlocks after learning about their cultural significance. The hours they'd spent together researching proper care techniques. The pride in Jamal's eyes when his first locks had finally formed. Somewhere deep in Dr. Washington's mind, a wall crumbled, the wall he'd built over decades of swallowing indignities, of smiling through racism, of teaching his son to rise above ignorance rather than confront it. The philosophy that had guided his life suddenly seemed hollow. Without conscious thought, he found himself driving not home, but to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, where Skyline maintained its regional headquarters. His phone continued to buzz with updates, including one from his investment manager asking if he'd seen the news about Skyline stock beginning to slip following a viral incident. Dr. Washington pulled into a reserved parking space with his name on it, one of the perks of being a major investor that he rarely used. As he strode through the executive entrance of the terminal, employees nodded respectfully, unaware of the connection between this well-known investor and the unfolding crisis. Dr. Washington greeted Miranda Phillips, the administrative assistant for the regional office. "We weren't expecting you today. Would you like me to let Mr. Daniels know you're here?" "No need," Dr. Washington replied, walking directly toward the regional manager's office. "He'll know soon enough." Gregory Daniels, Skyline's Southeast Regional Manager, was in the middle of a crisis call when Dr. Washington entered without knocking. Daniels held up one finger, signaling for a moment, not yet realizing who had entered. "Yes, I understand the gravity, but we need to follow protocol," Daniels was saying into the phone. "The flight attendant has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. We've issued a statement." Dar. Washington cleared his throat, and Daniels looked up, his eyes widening in recognition. "I'll call you back," he said quickly, ending the call. "Dr. Washington, what an unexpected surprise. What can I do for you today? If this is about the incident on Flight 2143, I assure you we're taking it very seriously." "The incident," Dr. Washington repeated slowly, "involved my son." The color drained from Daniel's face. "Your son? Jamal Washington? The 17-year-old whose dreadlock was cut off by your employee?" "My son." Daniels fumbled for words, suddenly connecting the dots between the major investor standing before him and the PR disaster unfolding across social media. "Dr. Washington, I had no idea." "Please, sit down. We're investigating thoroughly, I assure you." "I don't want your assurances," Dr. Washington said, remaining standing. "I want accountability. Not just for the flight attendant, but for the culture that made her believe this was acceptable." "Of course," Daniels nodded nervously. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination." "Do you?" Dr. Washington asked quietly. "Then explain to me why the flight was allowed to take off after my son was assaulted. Explain why your CEO just gave a press conference defending the authority of your crew to maintain appearance standards." Daniels swallowed hard. Mr. Reynolds was speaking without full information. "Mr. Reynolds was speaking from the heart," Dr. Washington interrupted. "And he revealed exactly what Skyline truly values." He placed his phone on Daniel's desk, showing the live stream of Thomas Reynolds' disastrous press conference still in progress. "I own 23% of this airline," Dr. Washington said flatly. Daniels stared in shock. He knew Dr. Washington was an investor through Washington Capital Partners, but had no idea of the extent. 23, but that makes you our largest individual shareholder." "Yes, Dr. Washington confirmed." And I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Now. He picked up Daniel's desk phone and dialed a number from memory. Patricia. Andre Washington. Yes, it's about the incident. My son was the victim. He paused, listening. No, I'm not waiting until tomorrow. Either the board convenes in 2 hours, or I begin selling my shares. All of them. Do you agree with Dr. Washington's approach to handling this situation? Comment number 1 if you think he should use his position as the largest shareholder to force immediate change at Skyline. Comment number 2 if you think he should pursue legal action instead. Like this video if you believe both approaches are necessary, and subscribe to follow the full story of how this father fought back against injustice. The question is, would you have remained calm and strategic like Dr. Washington, or would raw emotion have taken over? Let's see what happened when this powerful father confronted the airline's leadership. The Skyline Airlines corporate headquarters in Atlanta occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming glass tower downtown. On the 48th floor, the boardroom, normally a place of orderly quarterly meetings and strategic planning sessions, had transformed into a scene of barely controlled chaos. Board members arrived in hastily arranged cars, many still in casual weekend attire, having been summoned with less than 2 hours' notice. The emergency meeting notification had been vague: crisis response required, Skyline cuts incident, immediate attendance mandatory. Inside, executive assistants scrambled to prepare materials as the company's stock price ticker displayed on the wall showed a disturbing downward trend. Skyline shares had dropped 8% in 3 hours and were still falling. "This is ridiculous," muttered Harold Blackwell, a 70-year-old board member who had been with the airline since its founding. "We're tanking over a haircut." "It wasn't just a haircut," corrected Janet Morris, one of the newer board members and the only black woman in the room. "Have you actually watched the video?" "I don't need to see it to know it's being blown out of proportion," Blackwell replied dismissively. "This whole social media outrage culture is destroying business." Before Janet could respond, CEO Thomas Reynolds entered, his typical confident stride noticeably diminished. At 52, Reynolds had built his reputation on cutting costs and maximizing shareholder value, with little patience for what he privately called soft concerns like customer experience and corporate culture. "We need to get ahead of this," he announced without preamble. "Our stock is in freefall. I've authorized a $50,000 goodwill payment to the family, which should resolve the immediate issue." $50,000. Janet Morris raised an eyebrow. "For publicly humiliating a minor and destroying a culturally significant aspect of his identity? That's insulting." Reynolds waved dismissively. "We can negotiate if needed, but I'm confident they'll accept. These situations typically..." The boardroom doors swung open, and Dr. Andre Washington entered, followed by his lawyer, Michelle Taylor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s known for handling high-profile discrimination cases. The room fell silent. "Dr. Washington," Reynolds recovered first, extending his hand. "I wasn't aware you'd be joining us today." Dr. Washington ignored the outstretched hand. "Evidently, there are many things you aren't aware of, Mr. Reynolds. Including the fact that the young man your employee assaulted today is my son." The revelation sent visible shock waves through the room. Board members exchanged glances, some confused, others suddenly understanding the gravity of the situation. "Your son?" Reynolds repeated, his confidence faltering. "We had no idea. Of course, this changes." "Nothing," Dr. Washington interrupted. "It changes nothing. My son deserves justice whether his father owns 23% of this airline or not. But since I do, we're going to address this properly." He placed a document on the table. "This is a list of immediate changes Skyline will implement. Non-negotiable." Reynolds reached for the document, skimming it with growing alarm. "These demands are completely unreasonable. Termination of involved staff without due process. Mandatory company-wide cultural sensitivity training. A $50 million endowment for cultural education programs. This is the minimum required to begin addressing the problem, Dr. Washington finished. And before you continue, you should know that I've spent the past 3 years documenting every discrimination complaint against Skyline. Not just the ones that made it to formal channels, but the hundreds that were dismissed, ignored, or buried. The room grew impossibly quieter. I don't understand, said Barbara Chen, another board member. Why would you be collecting complaints against a company you've invested in? Because I believe in fixing broken systems from within, Dr. Washington replied. I began investing in Skyline after my mother was humiliated by one of your flight attendants in 2018. I promised her I would change the culture of this airline. He turned to face Reynolds directly. I've waited, watched, and documented while this company repeatedly failed to address its systemic problems. Today, those problems were inflicted on my son. My patience is over. Reynolds attempted to regain control of the meeting. While we appreciate your concern, Dr. Washington, these decisions require proper board procedure. We can schedule a formal vote after an investigation. Skyline stock has dropped 12% since the video went viral, Michelle Taylor interjected, pointing to the ticker display. By market open tomorrow, you're looking at a potential 20% decline if this isn't addressed decisively. Dr. Washington is prepared to publicly divest all holdings immediately if these demands aren't met. Harold Blackwell scoffed. That would be financial suicide for him as well. Some things are more important than money, Dr. Washington replied calmly. My son's dignity, for one. The dignity of every passenger who looks like him, for another. Janet Morris spoke up. I've been raising concerns about our customer service training for 2 years. The data clearly shows disproportionate complaints from minority passengers, which have been consistently dismissed as subjective perception issues. Reynolds' face hardened. This is beginning to sound like a coordinated attack. Dr. Washington, with all due respect, are you using this unfortunate incident to leverage a takeover? The accusation hung in the air for a moment before Dr. Washington responded, his voice dangerously quiet. My son called me in tears today, with blood on his hands from where your employee cut him. And you think this is about corporate politics? He opened his laptop and turned it to face the board. On screen was a database with hundreds of entries, each a documented complaint against Skyline from passengers of color, complete with dates, flight numbers, employee names, and resolution status. For 3 years, I've been building this database, hoping I would never need to use it. I've watched your complaints against certain demographic groups increase by 37% while your response rate decreased. I've tracked how often minority passengers are removed from flights compared to white passengers exhibiting identical behaviors. He scrolled through the database, revealing its comprehensive nature. This isn't just anecdotal. It's pattern and practice, documented meticulously. The kind of evidence that doesn't just lead to settlements, but to systemic court-ordered reforms. Reynolds paled visibly. You've been spying on company operations. I've been documenting publicly available information as a concerned shareholder, Dr. Washington corrected. Every complaint in this database was submitted through your official channels. The problem is what happened, or didn't happen, afterward. Barbara Chen had been reviewing the demands document. Some of these changes make sense from both a moral and business perspective. The training programs, policy revisions, transparent reporting of incidents. The firing of Thomas Reynolds does not, Reynolds interjected sharply. This is nothing short of a hostile maneuver. Janet Morris had been quietly examining the database on Dr. Washington's computer. According to this, you personally dismissed 17 formal discrimination complaints last quarter alone, classifying them as, without merit, despite supporting evidence. The boardroom doors opened again, and a junior executive entered with a tablet. Excuse the interruption, but you need to see this, he said urgently, handing the tablet to Reynolds. On screen was an internal email from Captain Bradley Mason to Skyline's Flight Operations Department, sent immediately after landing. Handled situation with disruptive passenger in first class. Crew acted appropriately to enforce appearance standards despite passenger noncompliance. Recommend commendation for F.A. Harmon for maintaining decorum under pressure. Reynolds quickly passed the tablet to the company's legal counsel, who had been silently observing from the corner of the room. Dr. Washington's phone buzzed. He checked it briefly. "That's my son. He's been invited to appear on National Morning Today tomorrow." He looked up at the board. "Your choice. Accept these demands now, or I sell my shares at market open and join him on national television to discuss exactly why." The board erupted into overlapping arguments, with clear divisions forming between those advocating for immediate action and others insisting on standard procedures. Amidst the chaos, Reynolds attempted one final play. "Dr. Washington, let's be reasonable. You're clearly upset, and understandably so. But you're essentially holding the company hostage over what is, legally speaking, a minor incident that could be settled quietly." The room fell silent again as Dr. Washington stood, his full height and presence commanding attention. "Mr. Reynolds, 30 years ago I was a medical student. I was top of my class, but I was told people wouldn't want someone like me operating on their brains. I've spent my entire career proving that ignorance wrong, all while teaching my son to rise above prejudice through excellence rather than confrontation." He paused, looking each board member in the eye. "Today, I watched my son bleed because he was excellent in the wrong skin. I will not teach him to rise above this. I will show him how to change it. Skyline will become an example either of transformation or of consequence." After a tense silence, Janet Morris spoke. "I move that we accept Dr. Washington's demands and form an implementation committee immediately." "Seconded," said Barbara Chen without hesitation. "This is irregular," protested Harold Blackwell. "We need proper procedure." "Vote now, or I walk," Dr. Washington stated flatly. "And I start selling at 9 a.m. Reynolds looked to the company's legal counsel, who gave a subtle nod, recognizing the existential threat to the company. "All in favor of accepting the demands as presented," Reynolds said through clenched teeth. Hands rose around the table, some eagerly, others reluctantly. Even Harold Blackwell eventually raised his, though his expression remained sour. "Motion carries," Reynolds announced. "Dr. Washington, you have your answer." "Good," Dr. Washington replied. "As my first act as a cooperating board member, I move that we immediately suspend Thomas Reynolds and Bethany Harmon pending a formal investigation." Before Reynolds could object, the vote was called and passed swiftly. "This meeting is adjourned," Janet Morris announced, effectively taking control. "Dr. Washington, we'll need your assistance formulating the public statement." As the boardroom cleared, Reynolds lingered behind, his career in shambles. "You've been planning this for years," he accused Dr. Washington quietly. "No," Dr. Washington replied, gathering his materials. "I've been hoping for years I would never have to do this. You and your culture of discrimination forced my hand." As he left the boardroom, Dr. Washington felt no triumph, only a grim determination. The real work, both for the airline and for helping his son heal, was just beginning. The hotel room in Manhattan should have felt luxurious. Instead, it felt like a cage to Jamal Washington as he sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, staring at his reflection in the ornate mirror across the room. His hand reached up unconsciously to touch the spot where his dreadlock had been cut, finding only the small bandage covering the place where the scissors had nicked his scalp. Outside, the bustling energy of New York City continued unabated. Somewhere across town, the National Youth Music Program's orientation was happening without him. The opportunity he had worked countless hours to earn was slipping away while he hid from the media frenzy his ordeal had sparked. His phone buzzed again, the 43rd notification in the past hour. Most were from strangers, finding his social media accounts and sending messages ranging from support to unwanted advice to occasional hatred. Jamal had stopped reading them. The only messages he'd responded to were from his father, updating him on the board meeting, and his saxophone instructor back home, who had simply written, "This doesn't define you." Your music does. A soft knock at the door broke his trance. Jamal. It's Dad. Dr. Washington entered, looking simultaneously exhausted and energized. He'd spent the past 5 hours in emergency meetings with Skyline's board and legal team. How you holding up? He asked, sitting beside his son. Jamal shrugged. Everyone's seen it, he said quietly. Millions of people have watched me get. He couldn't finish the sentence. The humiliation was still too raw. Dr. Washington placed a hand gently on his son's shoulder. I know. But they've also seen your dignity. Your restraint. What good did restraint do? Jamal suddenly burst out, years of carefully contained emotion finally breaking through. I've always done what you taught me: excel, stay calm, don't give them a reason. And look what happened anyway. The outburst hung between them, father and son both surprised by its intensity. You're right, Dr. Washington said finally, the admission clearly difficult for him. I taught you what helped me survive in a world that wasn't fair. Maybe I should have taught you more about changing that world instead. Jamal looked up, surprised by his father's words. The thing is, Dr. Washington continued, I never wanted fighting racism to become your job. I wanted you to be free to just be a musician, a student, a teenager. But freedom isn't really freedom if it depends on others' permission. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, a twin to the reed holder he'd given Jamal before their trip. This was supposed to be a graduation gift, but I think you need it now. He opened the box to reveal a small carved figure, a musician with a saxophone, made from the same African blackwood as the reed holder. It was your grandfather's. He played too, back when black musicians had to use service entrances to perform in the very clubs they were making famous. Jamal took the figure, examining its intricate details. You never told me he was a musician. There's a lot I haven't told you, Dr. Washington admitted. About our family history, about my own experiences. I think I wanted to protect you from it all. I'm not a kid anymore, Dad. No, Dr. Washington agreed. You're not. And after today, you're also something else, a symbol, whether you want to be or not. Jamal groaned, falling back on the bed. I just want to play my saxophone. And you will, his father assured him. But first, you have a choice to make about tomorrow. National Morning Today wants to interview you about what happened. I know. They've called 6 times. Jamal stared at the ceiling. What do you think I should do? What do you want to do? Dr. Washington countered. Before Jamal could answer, his phone chimed with an unfamiliar tone, a direct message on Music Connect, the social platform for aspiring musicians. The message was from Sophie Williams, another scholarship recipient in the program. Hey, I saw what happened. We all did. The program director says your spot is secure whenever you're ready. We're saving you a seat. Some of us are organizing a solidarity event tomorrow if you're interested. No pressure. Your music speaks for itself. Attached was a photo of the program participants, many with temporary blue ribbons in their hair, the color of Skyline Airlines, with a sign reading, Artists Against Discrimination #Justice for Jamal. Something shifted in Jamal's expression as he showed the message to his father. I missed the first day, he said, a new determination in his voice. I'm not missing the second. Are you sure? Dr. Washington asked. No one would blame you for taking time. That's what they want, isn't it? For people like us to stay quiet, stay home, stay invisible. Jamal stood up, a decision made. I'm going to the program tomorrow. And I'll do the interview, but on one condition, I play my saxophone first. I want them to see me as a musician before they see me as a victim. Dr. Washington nodded, pride evident in his eyes. I'll make the arrangements. That night, as Dr. Washington finalized details with the network, Jamal received another unexpected message. This one came from Derek Hamilton, a Grammy-winning saxophonist who had been Jamal's idol since he first picked up the instrument. "Young king, what happened to you was an assault on your personhood, your heritage, and your art. I've been where you are. Different circumstances, same fight. I'm in NYC right now. Would be honored to meet you, musician to musician. Your father has my number. Keep playing. Keep being. The greatest revenge is excellence." For the first time since the incident, Jamal felt something beyond anger and humiliation, a sense of connection to something larger than himself, a lineage of artists who had faced discrimination and transformed it into transcendent music. The next morning, Jamal arrived at the National Youth Music Program with his father. As they approached the entrance, he hesitated, suddenly aware of the stares and whispers from people recognizing him from the viral video. "Second thoughts?" Dr. Washington asked quietly. Jamal squared his shoulders. "No. But I think I need to do this part alone." His father nodded understandingly. "I'll be right here when you're done." As Jamal walked into the building, carrying his saxophone case like a shield, the program director, Dr. Eliza Montgomery, met him immediately. "Jamal, we're so glad you made it," she said warmly. "Your absence was deeply felt yesterday." Before he could respond, a small group of students approached, led by a tall girl with bright eyes whom Jamal recognized from the photo as Sophie Williams. "You must be Jamal," she said, extending her hand. "Your audition recording was incredible. We saved you a seat in the saxophone section." The simple normality of the interaction, being recognized for his music rather than his trauma, brought a lump to Jamal's throat. "Thanks," he managed. "Sorry I missed yesterday." "Don't apologize," Sophie said firmly. "We're the ones who should be sorry. What happened to you, it was wrong on every level." Other students nodded in agreement. One young man with a trumpet case spoke up. "We're organizing a benefit concert. Proceeds will go to an organization that fights discrimination. Would you consider performing?" Jamal looked around at these peers who had welcomed him without hesitation, who saw him as a fellow musician first. Something began to heal inside him. Not completely, but enough to breathe again. "Yeah," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I'll perform. Actually, I've been working on a new piece. It's not finished yet, but maybe it should be about this experience." "That would be powerful," Dr. Montgomery said. "Music has always been one of our strongest tools against injustice." That afternoon, during a break in rehearsals, Jamal sat alone in a practice room, his saxophone in his hands, experimenting with a melody that had been forming in his mind since the incident. It started low and constrained, then gradually built toward something seeking liberation. A knock at the door interrupted his practice. Derek Hamilton, in person, stood in the doorway. "Your father told me I'd find you here," the legendary musician said. "That's a powerful piece you're working on." Jamal stood up, momentarily starstruck. "Mr. Hamilton, thank you for coming. Music saved my life," Hamilton said, taking a seat across from Jamal. "When I was about your age, a police officer broke my fingers for being in the wrong neighborhood after dark. Doctor said I might never play properly again." He held up his hands, showing the slight crookedness of two fingers. "Proved them wrong, though. Every time I play, it's an act of resistance." "That's how it feels now," Jamal admitted. "Before, music was just joy. Now it feels like making music is fighting back somehow." "It can be both," Hamilton assured him. "Joy is resistance too, in a world that doesn't want you to have it." He gestured to Jamal's saxophone. "May I?" Jamal handed over his instrument. Hamilton played a few notes of the melody Jamal had been working on, then extended it with a phrase that perfectly captured the emotion Jamal had been struggling to express. "Your story, your voice," Hamilton said, returning the saxophone. "But we all stand on the shoulders of those who played before us." That evening, as Jamal prepared for his television appearance, he made a decision. Instead of just answering questions about being a victim, he would use the platform to debut the piece he and Derek Hamilton had worked on that afternoon. He would reclaim his narrative through his art. When the cameras went live the next morning, viewers expecting to see only a traumatized teenager instead witnessed the birth of an artist who refused to be defined by what had been taken from him, but by what he continued to create despite it all. The performance left the studio audience in tears, and as the final note faded, Jamal Washington was no longer just a hashtag or a viral video. He was a musician whose response to injustice was to create beauty so undeniable it demanded the world not look away. The law offices of Templeton, Greer and Associates occupied 3 floors of a sleek building in downtown Atlanta. In a glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor, Amara Templeton, the firm's founding partner and a specialist in corporate ethics investigations, studied a mounting collection of evidence with growing concern. "This goes far beyond a single incident," she said, addressing the team of attorneys and investigators assembled around the table. "We're seeing a pattern dating back at least 5 years." Skyline Airlines had hired Templeton's firm as independent investigators following Dr. Washington's demands for transparency. What had begun as damage control was rapidly evolving into something much larger. James Parrish, a former federal prosecutor now working for Templeton, pulled up a spreadsheet on the main screen. "We've identified 73 complaints involving Bethany Harmon over her 15-year career. 58 involved passengers of color, and 42 were officially classified as resolved without action despite clear policy violations." "And Captain Mason?" Amara asked. 12 incidents where he authorized removal of passengers following crew complaints. All 12 were minorities, primarily Black and Middle Eastern individuals. James clicked to another document. "We've also found this," an email exchange between Mason and former Chief of Operations William Grant discussing what they called demographic comfort balancing. The email appeared on screen, dated 3 years earlier. "Bill, need guidance on crew concerns about F-class demographic shifts. FA's reporting increased tension when too many upgrades go to certain passenger types. Suggestions?" Mason. The response was equally troubling. "Bradley, understand the concern. Remind crews that equipment issues can be cited when necessary to maintain cabin harmony. No documentation needed for these operational decisions." WG. Equipment issues, Amara repeated. "A code for denying boarding or upgrades to minorities?" "It appears so," James confirmed. "We found 37 instances where equipment issues were cited for downgrades or rebookings that affected almost exclusively minority passengers." As the investigation team continued their briefing, across town at Skyline headquarters, interim CEO Janet Morris was facing her own disturbing discoveries. After Reynolds' suspension, she had been granted emergency authority by the board to implement immediate reforms while the investigation proceeded. "These came from IT," said Lena Johnson, the newly appointed chief of compliance, placing a folder on Janet's desk. They were in a password-protected folder on the former CEO's private server. Inside were documents labeled Passenger Profile Indicators. A scoring system for identifying potentially disruptive passengers during the check-in process. The criteria included names consistent with certain ethnic backgrounds, passengers traveling from predominantly minority neighborhoods, clothing styles associated with urban culture, natural hairstyles including dreadlocks, braids, and afros, purchase patterns showing last-minute bookings or fare sales. This was implemented system-wide? Janet asked, horrified. 3 years ago, Lena confirmed. Gate agents and flight attendants were trained to flag passengers meeting these criteria for additional scrutiny. It was presented as a customer service quality initiative. Janet leaned back in her chair, the magnitude of the situation sinking in. We're not just dealing with a few biased employees. This was institutionalized discrimination. Meanwhile, Dr. Washington was building a coalition of his own. In the private dining room of Atlanta's exclusive Piedmont Club, he met with 12 other prominent investors, all successful black professionals with significant holdings across various industries. Skyline is just the tip of the iceberg, he told the assembled group. Every transportation and service industry has these issues. What happened to Jamal has given us an opportunity to demand real change. Maxwell Pierce, a tech entrepreneur and venture capitalist, nodded in agreement. I've already begun reviewing my portfolio company's customer service metrics by demographic. The disparities are striking once you actually look for them. The question is strategy, said Danielle Reeves, who managed a major pension fund. Do we work from inside as shareholders, or apply pressure from outside through boycotts and media? Both, Dr. Washington replied decisively. I'm remaining on Skyline's board to ensure the reforms have teeth, but we need external pressure to maintain momentum. The group discussed forming an investment collective specifically focused on transportation equity, with the power to influence policies across airlines, rideshare companies, and other services. As these separate investigations and initiatives unfolded, the media landscape was shifting as well. What had begun as outrage over a viral video had evolved into in-depth reporting on discrimination throughout the travel industry. The National Transportation Equality Project, a civil rights organization that had been documenting such incidents for years, suddenly found their previously ignored research at the center of national attention. Their database of over 3,000 incidents provided crucial context to Jamal's experience, revealing it as part of a systemic problem rather than an isolated event. Competing airlines, initially hoping to capitalize on Skyline's troubles, found themselves under scrutiny as well. When Aeronational Airlines ran advertisements promising respectful service for all passengers, former employees quickly came forward with stories contradicting this claim, forcing the company to withdraw the campaign. At the Department of Transportation, Secretary David Alvarez called an emergency meeting of airline executives. This is now a federal concern, he informed them. We will be conducting a comprehensive review of customer service policies across all carriers, with particular attention to potential civil rights violations. Back at Templeton's law office, a young paralegal burst into the conference room, interrupting the ongoing briefing. You need to see this, she said urgently, connecting her laptop to the display screen. It just leaked online. The screen showed an internal Skyline training video from 2 years earlier. In it, a trainer instructed flight attendants on appearance standard enforcement, using troubling language. When addressing appearance concerns with passengers in premium cabins, remember that our first-class experience is designed with our core customer base in mind. Passengers whose appearance may cause discomfort to our typical first-class customers should be addressed discreetly but firmly. The video went on to demonstrate scenarios, all featuring actors portraying minority passengers, and suggested phrases for redirecting these passengers to comply with unstated cultural expectations. Where did this come from? Amara demanded. Anonymous upload, the paralegal explained. But it's been verified as authentic by 3 former Skyline trainers. James Parrish checked his phone as it buzzed with a notification. It gets worse. Someone just leaked what they're calling a no-fly list from Skyline's customer database. It appears to be passengers who filed discrimination complaints, many of whom were subsequently flagged for enhanced security screening on future flights. The revelations continued to cascade. By the end of the week, what had begun as an investigation into one flight attendant's actions had expanded to implicate dozens of executives, a corporate culture built on systemic bias, and industry-wide practices that had gone unchallenged for decades. On Friday afternoon, as Jamal finished his first full week at the music program, having missed only that first day, Dr. Washington received a call from Amara Templeton. Dr. Washington, we've completed our preliminary findings, she said, her voice grave. This goes beyond anything we anticipated. The board needs to see this immediately. How bad is it? He asked. Bad enough that criminal charges are possible for some executives, she replied. And the financial liability, the class action that's forming could involve thousands of plaintiffs. Dr. Washington closed his eyes briefly. What had happened to his son was just the visible tip of a massive iceberg of discrimination. The question now was whether to melt the iceberg slowly through reform or shatter it through legal action that might destroy the company entirely. "I'll be there in an hour," he said finally. "And Amara? Bring everything. It's time for complete transparency, whatever the cost." As he ended the call, he stared out his office window at the Atlanta skyline, the Skyline corporate headquarters visible in the distance. The company he had invested in with the hope of changing from within now stood at a crossroads, as did he. The father in him wanted justice for his son, but the businessman understood that true systemic change required more than just punishment. His phone rang again, Jamal calling from New York. Dr. Washington took a deep breath and answered, knowing the decisions he made in the coming days would shape not only the future of an airline but also the lesson his son would learn about power, justice, and the possibility of genuine transformation. The hearing room in the Rayburn House office building fell silent as Jamal Washington approached the microphone. The Congressional Subcommittee on Transportation and Infrastructure had convened a special session titled Discrimination in Air Travel, Policies, Practices, and Protection of Civil Rights. At 18, Jamal was the youngest witness scheduled to testify. His father sat supportively in the row behind him, alongside Michelle Taylor, their attorney. Across the room, interim Skyline CEO Janet Morris and several board members waited their turn, as did transportation officials and civil rights experts. Representative Diane Lawson, the committee chairwoman, addressed him kindly. "Mr. Washington, thank you for being here today. We understand this may be difficult, but your perspective is invaluable to our investigation. Please proceed when you're ready." Jamal adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and began speaking without notes. 3 months ago, I was just a saxophone player excited about a music program. Today, I'm sitting before Congress. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I didn't ask to become a symbol or to have my name turned into a hashtag. But what happened to me on that plane happens to people who look like me every day, usually without cameras recording, without powerful parents, without viral videos to force accountability. He touched the spot where his dreadlock had been cut. A small patch had begun to regrow, standing out from the rest of his hair that now reached past his shoulders. When that flight attendant cut my hair, she didn't just remove a dreadlock. She cut away a piece of my identity, my culture, my self-expression. She decided that who I am was incompatible with being treated with dignity. The room remained silent, captivated by his composed delivery despite the emotion behind his words. Since that day, I've received over 10,000 messages from people sharing similar experiences, not just on airlines, but in schools, workplaces, and public spaces everywhere. People denied opportunity, dignity, or safety because of their appearance, their names, their accents. He leaned forward slightly. What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident or just one person's bias. It was the result of a system designed to make certain people feel unwelcome. The only thing unusual about my situation was that it was recorded, and that my father had the power to demand accountability. Representative James Chin spoke next. "Mr. Washington, your testimony is powerful. What do you hope will come from these hearings?" Jamal considered the question carefully. "I hope no other kid has to choose between their cultural identity and being treated with respect. I hope companies realize that diversity isn't just something for their marketing materials but something they actually have to practice. And honestly, I hope someday I can just be known as a musician again, not as the kid who had his dreadlock cut off on a plane." The questioning continued for nearly an hour, with Jamal answering thoughtfully, occasionally deferring to his attorney on legal matters. When he finished, the committee thanked him, and he returned to his seat beside his father, who squeezed his shoulder proudly. Next to testify was Thomas Reynolds, Skyline's suspended CEO, who had been subpoenaed despite the company's attempts to shield him from public questioning. From his first statement, it was clear Reynolds had been poorly prepared by his personal legal team. "While I regret the discomfort experienced by Mr. Washington, I maintain that Skyline's policies were designed to ensure a consistent experience for all passengers. Any implementation issues were the result of individual employee actions, not corporate direction. Representative Lawson leaned forward. Mr. Reynolds, we have obtained internal emails in which you personally approved what was called the Passenger Profile Indicators Program. Are you familiar with this program? Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. I sign off on many operational initiatives. I can't recall the specific details of every program. Let me refresh your memory, Representative Lawson continued, displaying the documents on the room's screens. This program explicitly instructed staff to flag passengers with urban appearance and culturally specific hairstyles for additional scrutiny. Your signature appears on page 3. The hearing deteriorated further for Reynolds as committee members presented document after document showing his knowledge of and participation in discriminatory practices. By the time he was dismissed, his testimony had become a masterclass in corporate evasion and plausible deniability, one that convinced no one. Meanwhile, outside the Capitol, public interest in the case had not waned. A diverse crowd of several hundred people had gathered, many holding signs reading, "Justice for Jamal," and "Cut discrimination, not culture." The demonstration had been organized by a coalition of civil rights organizations, student groups, and industry employees. Among them was a contingent of flight attendants from multiple airlines, wearing their uniforms and carrying signs reading, "Not in our name," and "Dignity for all passengers." Their presence sent a powerful message that frontline workers were distancing themselves from corporate policies they had been expected to enforce. Back in the hearing room, Janet Morris took the witness chair as Skyline's interim CEO. Her testimony struck a markedly different tone. I begin by offering a complete and unreserved apology to Jamal Washington and to every passenger who has experienced discrimination on our airline, she stated firmly. What happened was inexcusable and reflective of systemic failures that we are now committed to addressing. She outlined the extensive changes already implemented at Skyline, including termination of employees directly involved in discrimination incidents, comprehensive revision of all appearance and behavior policies, mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, creation of a passenger advocacy office with direct board oversight, transparent reporting of all discrimination complaints and resolutions, hiring of diversity officers at every major hub. We recognize that these changes, while necessary, cannot undo the harm already caused, Morris concluded. Skyline is committed not just to internal reform but to becoming a leader in promoting equity throughout the industry. As the hearing proceeded into its second day, the Department of Transportation presented its preliminary findings from a broader investigation into industry practices. The results were damning. Every major airline showed statistically significant disparities in how passengers of color were treated, from upgrade availability to removal rates to complaint resolution. Secretary Alvarez announced a series of new regulations requiring airlines to collect and publicly report demographic data on passenger experiences, with substantial penalties for companies showing persistent disparities. The hearing's impact extended beyond government action. Major corporate clients began announcing travel policies requiring airlines to demonstrate equity commitments before being approved for business contracts. Travel influencers launched a dignity rating system scoring airlines on their treatment of diverse passengers. For Skyline specifically, the path forward remained uncertain. While the company had responded aggressively to the crisis with Morris at the helm, its stock had yet to recover fully. The board was divided on whether to attempt to rebuild independently or seek merger options that would essentially dissolve the Skyline brand. 1 week after the hearings concluded, Dr. Washington received a call from Patricia Harding, the board chairperson. "Andre, we've made a decision," she said without preamble. "We want you to take over as chairman." The offer stunned him. "Why me? I forced the company into this position." "Exactly," Patricia replied. "You saw what needed to change before anyone else did. You have the moral authority and business acumen to lead a genuine transformation." The board voted unanimously. Dr. Washington was silent for a long moment. The offer presented both opportunity and dilemma. As chairman, he could ensure the reforms had real impact rather than becoming corporate window dressing. But accepting would also tie him personally to Skyline's future success or failure. "I need to discuss this with my son," he said finally. "This affects him too." That evening, in a video call between Atlanta and New York, father and son debated the unexpected offer. "If you take it, people might think we've been bought off," Jamal pointed out. "Like they gave you power to make you stop pushing for change." Or, Dr. Washington countered, "It could be a chance to make sure the changes are real and lasting." "What about the lawsuit?" Jamal asked, referring to the class action that had formed with him as the lead plaintiff. "Wouldn't that be a conflict?" "Yes," his father acknowledged. "I'd have to step away from any involvement in the litigation." Jamal considered this, absently touching the regrowth of his cut dreadlock. "So we'd be giving up our fight?" "Not giving up," Dr. Washington clarified. "Changing tactics. Sometimes you fight from the outside, sometimes from within. The question is which approach will create the most meaningful change." Their conversation continued late into the night, weighing principles against pragmatism, justice against strategy. By morning, they had reached a decision, though not the one either had expected at the beginning of their discussion. The next day, as Skyline stock fluctuated with rumors of bankruptcy or potential acquisition, Dr. Washington prepared for the announcement that would determine not just his family's next chapter, but potentially the future of an entire industry's approach to equality. Camera flashes illuminated the Skyline Airlines headquarters lobby as journalists from across the country gathered for what had been billed as a major announcement regarding the company's future. Speculation ran rampant. Would the embattled airline declare bankruptcy? Announce a merger? Reveal additional scandals? The tension in the room was palpable as Dr. Andre Washington approached the podium, flanked by Janet Morris, Patricia Harding, and surprisingly, Jamal Washington. The presence of the teenager whose dreadlock cutting had triggered the company's crisis sent a ripple of whispers through the assembled press corps. Dr. Washington adjusted the microphone and addressed the room with the measured confidence that had become his trademark throughout the ordeal. 3 months ago, my son boarded a Skyline Airlines flight as an excited young musician heading to a prestigious program. What happened next sparked a national conversation about dignity, identity, and whose humanity we recognize in our society. He paused, making eye contact with several reporters before continuing. "Yesterday, the Skyline board offered me the position of chairman, an opportunity to guide this company's transformation from within. After careful consideration and discussion with my family, I have decided to decline this position." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Cameras clicked rapidly as reporters rushed to update their developing stories. Instead, Dr. Washington continued, "I am announcing the formation of the Transportation Equity Initiative, an independent foundation dedicated to addressing discrimination across all modes of transportation. Skyline Airlines has committed $50 million in initial funding, with additional support from a coalition of industry partners and private investors." He gestured to Janet Morris, who stepped forward. "As Skyline's new permanent CEO, I am committed to making our airline an industry leader in equitable service," she stated firmly. "Beyond the financial commitment, we are implementing a complete policy overhaul developed in consultation with civil rights experts and affected communities. Every Skyline employee will undergo comprehensive training, and our progress will be monitored by an independent review board with results published quarterly." The announcement continued with Patricia Harding detailing specific policy changes, including the official termination of Bethany Harmon and Captain Bradley Mason, along with several executives who had enabled discriminatory practices. Then Jamal stepped to the microphone, his presence commanding despite his youth. "When my dreadlock was cut, I felt like my voice had been taken from me," he began, his voice steady. "So I decided to find it again through my music." He revealed that he had composed a piece titled "Severed," documenting his experience through music and spoken word. "Music has always been how our community has processed pain and created beauty from injustice," he explained. "This piece is my contribution to that tradition." Jamal announced that renowned saxophonist Derek Hamilton had invited him to record the composition professionally, with proceeds benefiting the new foundation. Additionally, He and his father were establishing a scholarship for minority students interested in transportation policy and design. "What happened to me was traumatic," Jamal acknowledged. "But trauma can either destroy you or transform you. I choose transformation, not just for myself, but for an entire system that needs to change." As the press conference concluded, the Washington family's approach became clear. Rather than seeking personal power or focusing solely on punishment, they had chosen to create sustainable, systemic change. By declining the chairmanship but remaining a significant shareholder, Dr. Washington maintained his leverage while avoiding potential conflicts of interest with ongoing legal actions. 6 months later, the impact of their strategy was becoming visible. Skyline's comprehensive reforms had begun showing measurable results. Complaint rates from minority passengers had decreased by 64%, while satisfaction scores had increased across all demographic groups. The airline had implemented visible changes in hiring practices, with diversity among flight crews increasing significantly. Their new training program was being adopted by other transportation companies as an industry standard. The class action lawsuit had been settled for a record amount, with funds distributed to thousands of passengers who had experienced discrimination. More importantly, the settlement included court-monitored compliance requirements that would ensure accountability for years to come. Jamal's dreadlocks had grown back substantially, each new inch a testament to resilience. He had completed the music program with honors and was now balancing his studies with speaking engagements and performances of "Severed," which had become an unexpected viral sensation after being featured in a documentary about cultural identity. One unexpected development came 3 months after the congressional hearings, when former Captain Bradley Mason contacted Dr. Washington requesting a meeting. Initially reluctant, Dr. Washington eventually agreed. "I've spent my life thinking I was one of the good ones because I never used slurs or intentionally discriminated," Mason admitted during their conversation. "But watching the testimony, seeing the evidence, I realized I enabled a system that hurt people. I just didn't want to see it." Mason had begun working with pilot associations to address bias in flight operations and was developing training materials based on his own awakening. While neither Washington fully trusted his transformation, they recognized the power of having someone who had been part of the problem now advocating for solutions. On a crisp autumn morning, Jamal arrived at LaGuardia Airport for a flight to Chicago, where he would perform at a benefit concert for the Transportation Equity Initiative. The difference in his experience was immediately apparent. Skyline employees greeted him with genuine warmth rather than suspicion, and the diversity among the staff reflected the passengers they served. As he settled into his seat, the lead flight attendant, Tara Williams, who had been promoted after speaking out against Bethany Harmon during the incident, approached him. "Mr. Washington, it's an honor to have you on board today," she said sincerely. "I want you to know that many of us are here because of the changes you and your father helped create. You've transformed this company." Before takeoff, the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing not just routine flight information but also acknowledging the traditional lands of the indigenous peoples where the airports were located, one of many small but meaningful cultural awareness practices now standard on all flights. As the plane lifted into the sky, Jamal looked out the window at the city below, reflecting on the journey of the past 9 months. What had begun as a moment of trauma had catalyzed transformation far beyond anything he could have imagined. His father had shown him that true power came not from position but from principle, not from vengeance but from vision. In his backpack was the small carved figure his father had given him, the musician with the saxophone, along with his grandfather's reed holder. Beside them was a journal where he had been developing ideas for his next composition, one focused not on pain but on possibility. The final proof that change was real came in a small, almost unnoticed moment as the flight attendant offered beverages. A young black girl with elaborate braids in first class was served with the same courtesy and warmth as every other passenger. No second glances, no requests to see her boarding pass again, no comments about her hair. Just normal, dignified service. Jamal smiled. This was what justice looked like, not just punishment for past wrongs, but the creation of a future where such wrongs would no longer occur. A future where children who looked like him could simply be, without having to justify their existence or their excellence. As the flight continued smoothly toward Chicago, Jamal opened his journal and began writing a new melody line, one that started in minor chords of struggle but gradually transitioned to major chords of triumph. One person's story had changed an industry, and in doing so, had changed countless future stories not yet written. What do you think about how Jamal and his father handled this situation? Would you have taken the chairman position or created the independent foundation? Let me know in the comments. If this story of resilience and systemic change inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of justice. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the real impact of discrimination and the power of strategic advocacy. Thank you for listening to this journey from trauma to transformation. Remember that one voice, when raised with courage and clarity, truly can change the world. This story teaches us that true change requires both courage and strategy. When Jamal's dreadlocks were cut, it represented more than a physical violation, it was an attack on his cultural identity and dignity. But rather than seeking only personal retribution, Jamal and Dr. Washington recognized an opportunity to address the root causes of discrimination. The Washingtons demonstrated that power comes in many forms. Dr. Washington could have simply sued the airline or accepted the chairman position, but he understood that sustainable transformation required independence and accountability. By establishing the Transportation Equity Initiative, he created a mechanism for industry-wide change that would outlast any individual lawsuit or leadership role. Jamal's journey reminds us that our responses to injustice define us more than the injustice itself. By channeling his trauma into art and advocacy, he reclaimed his narrative and helped others find their voices. His story shows that the most effective response to discrimination isn't just outrage but organized, strategic action that changes systems, not just individuals. The most profound lesson is that justice isn't merely punishment for wrongdoing, it's creating conditions where such wrongs no longer occur. Real justice is preventative, not just reactive, and requires changing hearts, minds, and structures simultaneously.